The alien perspective. The great council chamber of the galactic concordium thrummed with a low, rhythmic vibration, an echo of the massive energy core that powered the structure. Encased in transparent alloys, the chamber floated above the swirling gas giant Korath, a symbol of unity and shared purpose. But this day, unity was strained. Admiral Vorther of the Zalith Empire stood at the head of the chamber, his crimson exoskeleton catching the refracted light of the planet below. His deep, resonant voice cut through the murmurs of the gathered council members. "Why?" he began, his clawed hands resting heavily on the polished table. "Are the humans sending just one ship?" The question hung in the air, met with silence and exchanged glances. The gathered representatives of dozens of species, each more advanced than humanity in age and technology, could not comprehend the decision. The Sarnak fleet, vast, brutal, and without mercy, had crushed every armada sent to halt its advance. Yet here were the humans, newly inducted into the Concordium, dispatching a lone vessel. Vorther's compound eyes narrowed as he turned to his second-in-command, Captain Rorik. The younger officer's smooth, iridescent exoskeleton shifted colors subtly, a trait of his species when deep in thought. "Perhaps it is a bluff," Vorther continued, his tone dripping with disdain. "Or arrogance. Humans are known for their unpredictability." Rorik hesitated before responding, his voice softer but no less deliberate. "Unpredictability, yes. But arrogance? I am not so certain, Admiral. They are a species of rapid adaptation. Their history is rife with improbable victories. What if this is not recklessness but strategy?" The council chamber erupted into murmurs once more. Vorther silenced them with a single, commanding gesture. Strategy? Against a force that outnumbers and outguns them by orders of magnitude? They may have courage, but courage without wisdom is suicide. Rorik tilted his head slightly, a gesture of curiosity. "Then why not observe them, Admiral? If their plan fails, we lose nothing. If it succeeds," he left the thought hanging, a challenge to his superior cynicism. Vorther let the suggestion linger. He disliked uncertainty, preferring battles fought with overwhelming strength. Yet the humans had consistently defied conventional logic. Their rapid rise from isolation to interstellar relevance had already disrupted galactic norms. He found their methods irritatingly difficult to predict, and, though he would never admit it, intriguing. The holographic table between them flared to life, projecting an image of the Resolute. It was unimpressive by Concordium standards, a mid-sized vessel with modest armaments and a crew complement far below the average for such missions. Beside it hovered the data of the opposing Sarnak fleet, a staggering array of warships bristling with weapons. What could they possibly hope to achieve? Vorther muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Perhaps they are not fighting to win," Rorik offered, "but to prove something." Vorther's gaze snapped to his second-in-command. "Explain." Rorik gestured to the hologram, where the Resolute glided through space, a lone speck against the backdrop of the enemy fleet. "Humans do not think like us. They lack our longevity, our centuries of tradition. To them, every conflict is not merely about survival, but about identity. Perhaps this mission is meant to send a message, one as important as any tactical objective." "A dangerous gamble," Vorther replied, though he could not deny the logic. The Council's presiding figure, a luminous being of pure energy known as Orin, spoke for the first time. Its voice resonated in the minds of all present, calm yet commanding. "Admiral Vorther, Captain Rorik, the Concordium agrees. We shall observe the humans' efforts. Should they succeed, their methods will be studied. Should they fail, their hubris will serve as a warning to all." Vorther bowed his head slightly, though he bristled at the decision. Rorik's carapace shimmered faintly, betraying his satisfaction. As the council session adjourned, Vorther remained in place, staring at the hologram of the Resolute. The image rotated slowly, revealing every detail of the ship's design. "They defy logic," he said quietly, his voice more contemplative than critical. "And yet, I cannot look away." Rourke stepped beside him, his tone lighter. "Perhaps that is their greatest weapon, Admiral. They force us to question what we believe to be true." Vorther said nothing, his mind a battlefield of doubt and determination. The humans had one ship, one chance. Against all odds, he found himself curious, perhaps even hopeful, to see what they would do with it. The Resolute was already en route to the Sarnak fleet, its crew unaware that they were being scrutinized by the most powerful beings in the galaxy. For now, the question lingered, unanswered but potent. Why are the humans sending just one ship? In the silence that followed, Vorther made a decision. He would watch closely, not out of duty, but because, for the first time in many cycles, he found himself truly uncertain of the outcome, and that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. The hum of the Resolute's engines was a constant backdrop, steady and unyielding, as though echoing the resolve of its crew. In the cramped confines of the bridge, Captain Ethan Kane stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the viewport. Before him stretched the vastness of space, a blank canvas that would soon be filled with fire and death. "Status report," Kane said, his voice calm but firm. "Engines stable, weapon systems primed," replied First Officer Marcus Gray, seated at the tactical station. His tone carried no emotion, but his sharp eyes betrayed a restless energy. Gray was known for his precision, both in combat and conversation. He was the perfect counterbalance to Kane's measured leadership. At the engineering console, Lieutenant David Mason's fingers danced across the controls. His youthful face was tight with concentration, a thin sheen of sweat betraying his nerves. "Energy reserves holding steady, Captain," he said, glancing up briefly. "But I've optimized the reactor output as much as I can. If we push it further, we risk—" "We won't need more," Kane interrupted gently, his gaze still fixed ahead. "Not if everything goes according to plan." The plan. The words hung heavy in the air, unspoken but omnipresent. Everyone on board knew the stakes. The Sarnak fleet was a hammer of destruction, and the Resolute was a single, fragile nail. Mason hesitated. "With respect, sir, is the plan enough? One ship against—" "It's enough," Gray interjected, his tone curt. He didn't look up from his console. "Focus on your station, Lieutenant." Mason's mouth tightened, but he nodded and returned to his work. Kane turned away from the viewport and faced his crew. The bridge, though small, felt alive with their presence. Each officer represented the best of humanity, talent forged in the crucible of countless trials. But even the best could falter under the weight of impossible odds. "Gentlemen," Kane began, his voice low but steady, "I know what you're thinking. You've seen the data. You've done the math. And you're wondering why I would send us into this fight alone." Mason shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and even Gray paused his work to glance at the captain. Kane's gaze swept across the room, his sharp blue eyes meeting each of theirs. "The answer is simple. We're not here to match them ship for ship. We're here to prove that strength isn't just numbers or firepower. It's ingenuity, precision, and the willingness to risk everything when it matters most." Gray's expression remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Approval, perhaps. Mason, on the other hand, looked more uncertain than ever, though he didn't speak. Kane stepped closer to the center console, where a holographic projection of the Sarnak fleet loomed like a storm cloud. "The Sarnak believe we're weak, that sending one ship is a sign of desperation. They don't understand that this ship isn't just a weapon, it's a statement. A single strike, well placed, can bring down the largest beast. The words settled over the crew, heavy with meaning. Kane knew they weren't just for his officers. They were for himself. Leadership was a lonely burden, and the cracks in his own confidence were ones he couldn't afford to show. A sharp tone broke the moment as the comms console lit up. "Incoming message from Concordium Command," Mason announced, his voice tight. "Put it through," Kane ordered. The holographic figure of a Concordium liaison materialized, its translucent features alien and unreadable. "Captain Kane, the Concordium wishes to remind you that your mission is one of observation as much as engagement. If retreat becomes necessary—" "Retreat is not an option," Kane interrupted, his voice cold. "With respect, tell the Council that humanity doesn't retreat." The liaison hesitated, then gave a slight nod before the projection flickered out. Gray leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "They're already expecting us to fail." "They don't know us," Kane replied, turning back to the viewport. "But they will." Silence fell over the bridge, broken only by the soft beeps of the consoles. Kane let it linger, knowing his words needed time to take root. This wasn't just a battle. It was a test. For humanity, for the Resolute, and for him. "Captain," Mason said after a moment, his voice tentative, "the Sarnak fleet is on long-range sensors. Estimated contact in 12 hours. Kane nodded. "Maintain course." "Gray, run another simulation of the approach." "Mason, double-check the stealth systems. I want us invisible until we're ready to strike." Both men acknowledged the orders and turned back to their stations. Kane returned to the captain's chair, sitting with deliberate calm. The hours stretched on, filled with quiet preparation and occasional murmured exchanges. The tension was palpable, but it was a tension tempered by purpose. As the Resolute drew closer to the Sarnak fleet, the bridge lights dimmed, signaling the ship's transition to combat readiness. Kane stood once more, his posture unyielding. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice breaking the silence, "this is it. Our chance to show the galaxy what humanity is capable of." Gray gave a small nod, his hands steady on the controls. Mason swallowed hard but managed a determined look. Kane turned to the viewport, where the faint outlines of the Sarnak fleet were beginning to emerge. They looked like predators, circling their prey, massive and menacing. "Let's remind them," Kane said quietly, "that the size of the fight doesn't matter. Only the strength of the one who stands." The Resolute surged forward, a lone beacon of defiance hurtling toward the storm. The Resolute glided silently through the void, its sleek hull blending into the starlit expanse. The bridge was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of the ship's systems and the soft clicks of fingers on consoles. Captain Kane stood at the center of the room, his posture unyielding, his gaze locked on the massive Sarnak fleet that loomed ahead. There were dozens of them, towering dreadnoughts bristling with weaponry, flanked by an armada of destroyers and fighters. Their formation was tight, their sheer size and firepower meant to inspire dread. And yet, the Resolute moved forward undaunted, a single point of defiance against a tide of destruction. "Visual range confirmed," said Gray, his tone as crisp as ever. "Their lead ships are scanning for us, but the stealth systems are holding." "Good," Kane replied. His voice carried a calm that seemed to steady the entire crew. "They won't see us until it's too late." At the engineering console, Mason adjusted the power flow, his face tense but focused. "Reactor output is stable, Captain. But if we engage the cloak for too long—" "I know," Kane interrupted, his tone softer this time. "We just need it to hold a little longer." The holographic display in front of them showed the Sarnak fleet in detail. Their ships were sleek and angular, designed for swift, merciless strikes. Each vessel carried enough firepower to level a city in seconds. Against them, The Resolute was an anomaly, small, agile, and for now invisible. "Captain," Gray said, his voice cutting through the tension. "They're hailing us. Broad-spectrum transmission." Kane raised an eyebrow. "Let's hear it." A guttural voice filled the bridge, dripping with contempt. "Human vessel. This is War Leader Croft of the Sarnak Dominion. Your attempt to hide is futile. We see your desperation, your pitiful arrogance in sending a single ship. Surrender now, and I may consider sparing your crew." Mason glanced nervously at Kane, but the captain's expression remained unchanged. "Cut the transmission," Kane ordered. The voice vanished, leaving the bridge in silence once more. "What's the plan, Captain?" Mason asked, his voice betraying a mix of fear and curiosity. Kane stepped closer to the holographic display, his eyes narrowing as he studied the Sarnak formation. "They think we're hiding because we're weak. We'll show them what happens when they underestimate us." He tapped the console, and a new trajectory appeared on the display. "Gray, take us into their formation, fast and quiet. Mason, prepare the EMP payload. We're going to punch a hole right through them." Gray's hands moved swiftly over the controls. "Course laid in, Captain. This is going to be tight." "It always is," Kane replied with a faint smirk. The Resolute accelerated, its engines whisper-quiet as it slipped into the shadow of a Sarnak dreadnought. The crew held their breath as a massive ship passed overhead, its hull blotting out the stars. "Target in range," Gray reported. "EMP is armed." Kane straightened. "On my mark. Now." The Resolute unleashed a burst of energy, a carefully calibrated electromagnetic pulse that rippled outward in a wave of invisible force. The lights on the Sarnak dreadnought flickered, then died, its systems collapsing in an instant. The smaller ships nearby faltered as well, their sleek forms drifting aimlessly. "Direct hit," Mason said, his voice tinged with relief. But the victory was short-lived. The remaining Sarnak ships responded with brutal efficiency, breaking formation and turning their weapons toward the Resolute. "Here they come," Gray muttered, his hands flying over the controls. "Evasive maneuvers," Kane ordered. "Keep us moving. Mason, divert power to shields." The Resolute weaved through the onslaught, its small size and agility allowing it to evade the worst of the Sarnak's fire. Explosions lit up the darkness as the enemy's own weapons clipped their disabled ships, adding to the chaos. "Shields holding at 60%, Mason reported, his voice strained. "Focus fire on their command ship," Kane said. "If we take out Croft, the rest will fall apart." Gray nodded and locked onto the massive vessel at the center of the fleet. The Resolute's weapons roared to life, sending precise volleys of plasma fire toward the Sarnak flagship. The enemy ship retaliated, its weapon systems targeting the Resolute with deadly accuracy. The ship shuddered under the impact, sparks flying from the consoles as the shields buckled. "Shields down to 30%. Mason shouted. "Hold steady," Kane said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Gray, fire everything we've got. We end this now." The Resolute unleashed a final barrage, its weapons striking the Sarnak flagship's engines. The massive vessel convulsed, a chain reaction of explosions tearing through its hull. "They're breaking off," Gray exclaimed as the remaining Sarnak ships began to retreat, their formation crumbling without their leader. The bridge erupted in cheers, but Kane remained silent, his eyes still fixed on the viewport. The Sarnak were in full retreat, but the cost had been high. "Damage report," he said, his voice steady despite the weight in it. "Shields are gone," Mason replied, his hands trembling slightly. "Hull integrity at 50%. We're lucky to still be in one piece." Kane nodded, his expression unreadable. "We did what we came to do. Gray, plot a course back to friendly space. Mason, get the reactor stabilized. As the crew set to work, Kane allowed himself a moment to breathe. They had survived against all odds. But the battle was only the beginning. The galaxy would take notice, and the Resolute's defiance would not go unanswered. He turned to the viewport, where the wreckage of the Sarnak fleet drifted silently. In the face of overwhelming force, one ship had made a difference. And for Kane, that was enough for now. The Resolute drifted through the void, its once pristine hull marred by battle scars. Sparks danced along ruptured conduits, and the bridge lights flickered intermittently, casting long shadows over the weary crew. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the remaining systems and the occasional groan of strained metal. Captain Ethan Kane sat in his chair, shoulders square despite the exhaustion etched into his features. His sharp eyes scanned the holographic display in front of him, where the wreckage of the Sarnak fleet floated in haunting stillness. The once mighty armada was now a field of shattered ships and lifeless debris. "They're gone," First Officer Marcus Gray said, his voice low but steady. He leaned back in his chair, tension slowly ebbing from his frame. "The survivors are retreating to their nearest outpost. No sign of pursuit." Kane nodded, though his expression remained unreadable. "Damage report, Mason." Lieutenant David Mason wiped sweat from his brow, his fingers moving deftly over the controls. "Reactor is stable, but barely. Shields are gone, and we've lost 2/3 of our weapon systems. Hull integrity is at 45%. If we take another hit, we won't hold together." Kane's jaw tightened. "Understood. Focus on keeping us operational until we can rendezvous with Concordium Command." Mason hesitated, then spoke again, his tone hesitant. "Captain, if I may, why didn't they press the attack? The Sarnak aren't known for retreating, especially not from a single ship." Gray turned his chair slightly, his expression sharp. "Because we took out their war leader. Croft was the anchor of their strategy. Without him, they're rudderless." "Maybe," Mason said, though doubt lingered in his voice. "But it feels like they wanted to see what we do." Kane's gaze flicked toward Mason, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Elaborate." Mason swallowed hard, his fingers fidgeting on the console. "The Sarnak had us outgunned, outnumbered. They could have overwhelmed us easily. But after we disabled their flagship, they didn't regroup, they scattered. Almost like," he hesitated, "like they were testing us." Silence fell over the bridge as the crew absorbed his words. Gray broke it, his tone measured but firm. "Testing or not, we held the line. That's what matters." "Perhaps," Kane said, though his voice was distant. His mind churned with possibilities, each more troubling than the last. The Sarnak retreat had been abrupt, almost too convenient. A predator didn't abandon its prey unless it had a reason. "Captain," Gray said after a moment, his voice breaking through Kane's thoughts. "Incoming transmission from Concordium Command. Priority 1. Kane straightened. "Put it through." The holographic figure of a Concordium envoy materialized, its form shimmering with faint light. The alien's elongated features were neutral, though its glowing eyes betrayed a hint of curiosity. "Captain Kane," the envoy began, its voice calm but resonant. "Your mission has succeeded beyond expectation. The destruction of the Sarnak flagship has sent shockwaves through the Dominion. Their forces are in disarray. And for the first time in cycles, the Concordium has the advantage. We did what we had to," Kane replied, his tone even. "But the battle isn't over. The Sarnak won't stay disorganized for long." "Indeed," the envoy said, inclining its head. "Your actions have proven humanity's worth to the Concordium. However, there are concerns." Kane's eyes narrowed. "Concerns?" The envoy's gaze seemed to pierce through him. "The Sarnak have faced countless adversaries, many far stronger than your vessel. Yet they withdrew. This behavior is unprecedented. It suggests they were not merely defeated. They were observing. Kane exchanged a glance with Gray, whose expression mirrored his unease. Observing what? Humanity. The envoy replied simply. Your species is new to the galactic stage, unpredictable and, as this battle demonstrates, highly adaptive. The Sarnak may now view you as a threat unlike any they've faced before. Mason shifted uncomfortably in his seat. So, we've painted a target on our backs. Perhaps, the envoy said, or perhaps they see potential. The Sarnak are conquerors, but they are also pragmatists. It is possible they retreated not out of fear, but to recalibrate their strategy, to decide whether humanity is an enemy to destroy or an ally to exploit. Kane's hands tightened into fists, though his voice remained calm. What are you suggesting? That humanity must be ready, the envoy said. Your ingenuity and determination are your greatest assets, but they are also a double-edged sword. The galaxy is watching now, Captain. The Sarnak, the Concordium, and countless others. Every move you make will shape their perception of your kind. The hologram flickered, the envoy's face unreadable, for better or worse. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in silence once more. Gray leaned forward, his elbows resting on his console. So what now, Captain? Kane rose from his chair, his movements deliberate. He turned to face his crew, the weight of the envoy's words settling on his shoulders. Now, he said, his voice firm, we prove them right. Mason frowned. Right about what? That humanity isn't just a wild card, Kane replied. We're a force to be reckoned with, and we don't back down. Not from the Sarnak, not from the Concordium, not from anyone. The crew nodded, their expressions a mix of determination and exhaustion. Despite the odds, they had survived. They had struck a blow against a seemingly invincible foe, and they had done it together. Kane turned back to the viewport, where the debris of the Sarnak fleet drifted like ghosts. The battle was over, but the war was just beginning. Gray, he said, his voice cutting through the quiet, set a course for Concordium Command. Let's show them what humanity is capable of. The Resolute moved forward, its scarred hull gleaming faintly in the starlight. Behind it lay destruction. Ahead, an uncertain future. But for Kane and his crew, one truth was clear. They had taken the first step into a larger galaxy, and the galaxy would never be the same.